Hey everybody, it's Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. Today we're talking about queer attachment trauma. 3 words that in other circles sound very much independent of one another, and I'm stringing them together because it's a thing. If you're a member of the queer community or know any members of the queer community, you have been able to see this work out in relationships in lots of different ways. When you take 2 people who are raised in different households and you put them together in a long-term committed relationship, there's always going to be areas of disagreement. We're raised differently in homes, and some people are raised in multiple homes. Some people raise themselves, and all of those options come together to make a bit of friction when you're trying to set up household together. In the queer community, there's more layers to that. Even before I became a therapist, I could absolutely identify the queer relationships around me where the people in them were sort of working out their trauma scars, their pain from past relationships, the pain from growing up, sort of working them out on each other. It's an incredibly natural and also incredibly destructive thing to do in a relationship, especially one that you feel safe in. So we're going to talk about some markers of that and how you can, avoid it maybe, or help others avoid it. For some definitions, most of you have heard people talking about trauma bond. In this video, that's not what I'm talking about. A trauma bond is when a victim is bonded to the victimizer, and it makes it harder to leave. It makes it easier to excuse things. That's trauma bond, bonding with your abuser and the trauma that they inflict on you. This bonding through trauma is when you find somebody who has a similar baseline, a similar understanding of the acceptability and also lack of acceptability of themselves as a human and how that plays out in their understanding of attachment and need meeting and worthiness. Another definition, attachment theory, is the understanding that in the formative times of your life, how you bond with your caregiver has implications in how you bond with significant people in your life from there on out. This is also not specifically attachment theory. This is not specifically trauma bonding. This is not specifically any of those things. It's a thing in and of itself. It is queer attachment trauma. When you grow up in a society that explains to you from a very early age that there are certain ways to be, you expect that any ways that are not in those ways to be wrong. Even if it's not explicitly said to you, even if you didn't grow up in a religious or a conservative community that explained to you that being gay was wrong, being trans was wrong, that you have to have romantic and sexual attraction to other people because that's how we're made and that's natural for us. All of those things that are normalized in society and seen as like majority of society, when you fall outside those parameters, you feel like an outsider. That's heteronormativity, heterosexism, internalized homophobia, all the things that I talk about a lot on this channel. But the ways that it impacts our relationships are so much deeper because of the messages we carry throughout our lives. When you understand that acceptance comes from falling in line, you also begin to understand the implications of not falling in line, which is not being accepted. And then you grow up to imagine that your lack of ability to fit in makes you unlovable. Imagine this, child A grows up in a family that never specifically says anything negative about gay people. But child A grows up with a mother and a father married to each other and 1 or 2 siblings. Child A at some point starts to understand themselves to be different. Child A realizes that they are attracted to their friends that their parents assume are friends and not the people that parents expect them to be attracted to in a romantic way. Child A has never actually been told that being gay is wrong. Child A is really not even aware necessarily that gay is a thing because they've never seen it or had it modeled or had it normalized ever. They just realize that there's something going on with them that is not going on with the rest of their friends. When friends talk about people they're attracted to, they talk about other genders. So child A learns to hide. Child A hides all of the things about them that don't match what the peers do. So child A is both hyper fixated on matching what everyone else does so that they don't appear outside of the norm. And child A is hyper fixated on internally stuffing everything down and hiding it in every way possible so that they don't get found out. Does that sound extreme to you? I'm gonna tell you it's really not. Child A had that implied statement their whole lives that there is not another way to be. And so when you feel yourself being another way, you stop engaging and or pretend to engage in the way that everyone else expects you to. Both of those options stop you from being able to be authentic and form authentic attachments to people because you always have a wall up. If you always have a wall up and you always understand yourself to be unacceptable, you are always going to have that wall up and assume that you're unacceptable until you do it differently. Or until you meet that person that makes you feel like you could be acceptable. Or the person that sort of leads you on that path to understanding what this other thing inside of you means or looks like or is called. The self-discovery process for a queer child or teen is very rarely entered into individually. There's usually like a transitional object is what we would call it. Something that sparks that understanding, that helps you understand that. Maybe it's a crush, maybe it's a TV character or a book you read. But when you're first introduced to that idea that you could be different and also still be acceptable and still have authentic attachments to people, that's a big day for most queer people. It doesn't always happen in your teens or your 20s. Sometimes it happens later in life. Whenever it happens, that transitional object tends to take on sort of a mythical importance, whether it's a relationship, a friendship, a TV show or a movie, a book, whatever it is that helps you to understand that you could possibly, maybe one day be accepted as you are. That's a significant thing in your life. And this all kind of comes together because whether it's like a flesh and blood person in your life, or it's a person on a screen somewhere, or a concept of a person in a book, whoever you start to work that out with, whoever you have that first encounter with in the realm of who you're actually attracted to, or whoever you first let into the fact that you're actually not attracted in a sexual way to other people, that connection becomes your primary attachment. And when it becomes your primary attachment, it is really hard to see when it's unhealthy. Typical parameters of health in a heterosexual relationship are different than the parameters of health in a queer relationship. And understanding that there is still a healthy way to form attachments to people and an unhealthy way to form attachments to people. If we have two people in the position of child A that come together and are the first people to really accept the other person for who they are, to experience love and happiness, and to get beyond that wall together, that is an intense thing. And often that intensity is mistaken for intimacy. The intensity of your feelings does not equal intimacy. The intensity of your feelings also does not indicate how intimate you really need to be with a person. If any of you watched my video about how serious queer relationships get very fast, I addressed this a little bit more. The overall idea here is that when you find someone that allows you beyond that wall and helps you to understand that you could have healing in that connection process and that understanding that you can be acceptable and you can be loved, that person and their place in your life is so much more important than you are in reality. Their importance and their happiness and their affection is more important than your own needs sometimes, because you've lived with your needs your whole life. At the very least, you've lived with your need for secure attachment since you realized there was something different about you. When you realize that secure attachment with someone, there is a bond that is so strong that it feels like even if the relationship goes south, you have to stay in each other's lives. Because if you don't, that one person who convinced you, helped you to understand that you can have mature and healthy attachments, if they're gone, then how do you know anybody else is going to feel that way about you? This is the reason that so many queer people stay in that first relationship for way too long, or why those first couple relationships can end up being really destructive emotionally, sometimes physically. We look for people that fit our filters, and in that fitting of filters, we bypass the actual understanding of how we work together. If we find somebody who allows us beyond their wall and who will get beyond ours too and accept what they find there, rewrite the story of whether or not we're lovable, because until then we assume that we're not. And once they've rewritten that story for us, they're part of that story. So to remove them from your life is unheard of at first. Just because you've bonded over a mutually understood trauma in both of your lives does not mean you're necessarily good for each other. You might be, and that's great. But there are some relationship rules that need to be followed, like consent, mutual respect, understanding of what the other one needs. You don't always have to put someone else's needs ahead of yours in a relationship, but you also shouldn't always insist that your needs come first. The give and take in a relationship is the goal, and in the very beginning of a relationship, that's not where you're gonna end up once things settle down. Understanding what it means to truly bond with someone over shared trauma and being able to separate that out from the need to be in a relationship with that person is a lot of work. It can be done, it should be done, so that you can decide if that relationship is worth it for you or not. You can stay in that relationship, you can leave that relationship. Both of those are okay, and it does not remove what you've learned about yourself and what you've been taught as far as your worth for connection. That's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you all next week, and until then, take care of yourselves and each other.